Hey everybody, welcome again to my booktube channel. I guess I'll start somewhat making this a regular thing. It's been very like haphazard the past couple of months, but it's great to be back. And today I am joined by author Essa Hansen. Essa, how are we doing today?
I'm good. Hello, everybody.
So I have to ask kind of first off. I was looking through your bio the other day. I'd say you have probably one of the coolest bios I've ever read. So it says author, swordswoman, and falconer. I mean, first off, like you could just end it there and just be done. But to go on, it says you're also a sound designer for science fiction and fantasy films at Skywalker Sound, and you have credits in movies like Doctor Strange and Avengers Endgame. I mean, like that is awesome.
It's pretty cool. I'm like, my job and my hobbies and my writing are all like science fiction and fantasy. So I like spend most of my time just in other worlds. It's fun.
Does it ever get tiring or old? I bet it doesn't.
Um, it gets tiring. But I find that like the film work, even though it's creative in a similar way and it's storytelling, it uses a different part of my brain. So like I can work 10 hours and I still kind of have creative energy at the end of the day to do writing in the evening or like in the morning. So it's like different gears enough somehow that I
Yeah.
don't burn out on the creative part of it, even if I'm
Well,
physically tired.
I gotcha. That's good. Yeah, I was curious if like working in sound design, especially for science fiction and fantasy, does it ever seem like work? I mean, I'm sure it does. Like especially if you're cutting different things and it's just having to like repeat, 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 repeat. You're kind of getting. I don't know if you listen to the same things on a daily basis, and I don't know if you're trying to like critique it. Like, what exactly do you do for the studio?
Yeah, so as a sound designer, I often start early on um, creating sounds for like things that don't exist, the magic and the spaceships and the creatures, and like finding an aesthetic and figuring out how to sort of make the unreal more real and believable to the audience. But it's also crafting an aesthetic for the whole movie and like figuring out the emotion that we want and the key storytelling points and make sure that carries through the whole process. And I also always do some sound editing, so I'm in there putting in like all the ambiances and the nitty gritty. So I'll have like chunks of the film that are mine to sort of just go wild and cover everything.
Oh my gosh. I bet like at the beginning of that process, it's like so much fun because you're just like, all right, let's just throw all these sounds in there and so look, see what sounds
Yeah,
right.
yeah, and that's sort of my process. Is like just throw everything cool at it first, because we have a giant library of sounds from other movies or things we've recorded and like sounds specifically that I've made or recorded for this movie. So we have like a bunch of stuff to work from, but I'll start just like combing through and trying to find things and throwing everything cool at whatever it is, like whether it's the door or the vehicle or like the explosion. Throw everything cool at it and then start weeding that. Like, what do I really need? Like, what's working for what I want to convey? And I think I kind of do the same thing with writing, where like with description, I tend to overwrite. So like I'll put too many analogies or metaphors, like too many descriptive words, which is just my brain trying to like hit on some like the feeling that I want. And then when I'm editing, I'll go and like cut everything out and pick just the ones that are like, oh, that's what I need.
So you have like a couple of thousand like words that you just cut out that's just all description.
Yep, it's like too much. Get out of here.
So I have to know, so in sound design, so do you have like your own room that you sit in? Because I've always seen, videos, I guess it's like the additional footage for like, when people used to buy DVDs, you'd have like the additional footage and it shows a guy like in a room with like a bunch of different objects and they're trying to figure out like how those things make a certain noise. Is that what you do?
Somewhat. They usually show off. It's called Foley, which is all of the sort of human sounds, the sync sounds. So like we replace all the footsteps. If anyone touches anything like a water glass, we'll record that cloth movement and stuff to make the characters feel real. Because on set, the recordist isn't really picking up any of those like small detail sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So the Foley stage is where they've got like bins of all kinds of props and shoes and like swords and like weird objects and like every surface you could imagine on the floor is like sound playground. So that's always the cool thing to show off. And sometimes we'll go in there and do stuff, but that's like its own department. It's just
Okay.
focused on that.
I gotcha.
For sound design and sound editing, we're usually like, those are the photos where you see the person out in the field, like recording, like the lion or like in a meadow or something, or like, just out in the wild collecting stuff.
It's fascinating, because you don't really think about like how much sound goes into a movie or a TV show, because you're right, like a lot of sound isn't really picked up, except for voiceover.
Yeah, they're focused on the dialogue on set, and even sometimes that will be unusable or need a lot of cleanup because there's like wind machines or activity, or they're shooting near like a busy highway or something.
Right.
So we really have to replace 90% of all the sound you hear is someone like crafting it for the movie. And if we do it right, then you're not like, you're drawn into the experience. You're not pulled out of it, but you don't notice the sound or that it's sort of guiding you through the story. And my writing is often, people comment on how immersive it is, and I think that's because I spend a lot of time like thinking about sensory stuff and thinking about that sense of immersion. So like my job is to fill a theater and make it feel like a whole environment. So when I'm writing, I'm kind of like, I want the reader to feel this whole environment, like bridge the gap between the page and the reader.
I gotcha. Okay. So kind of going back to, we were talking a little bit off air. So I have to know, so Halloween's a couple of days away. What are you going to be doing?
I'll be working. I've had like interviews and essays and things to prepare for, book stuff. But my draft for book 2 is handed off. So now I need to start thinking of book 3 in the Graven trilogy. So I'll be doing that as well. But mostly hunkered down here still.
Yeah, about to say, because you're in California, right? So you've got a lot of fires, and of course COVID's still going, and I mean I just can't imagine what's going on over there.
Yeah, it's been tough, and like the deadlines don't go away, even though there's COVID and fires and smoke and all of this. So, like to keep being creative and try and keep your head down and focus has been really tough.
Yeah, and I know they've had some power outages and stuff. Has that affected you at all?
We've missed some of them. I live pretty close to the coast. So often we'll either get a big storm will come through, or the way that the hills are shaped, it'll like pass right by us. So we'll often get big warnings and then nothing happens. Or sometimes it does. So it's really unpredictable. So there's been lots of like projected outages that didn't actually happen. And then there'll be surprise ones where you thought everything seemed fine, but it just goes out.
That's like, it's like a sunny day outside and no smoke, no smog out in the air, and all of a sudden your power cuts out.
Yep. That happened earlier this week, but
good grief.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, luckily writing is like I can write without needing Wi-Fi. But often my research process is like Googling random things on the fly, like, am I using this scientific term right? Or like, is this plausible? Or so I realize when I don't have internet, how much it sort of like stops my momentum, where I've like sort of zip online to find some info or do some world building or research. So like to just put my head down and focus on the page, it's like not how I work anymore.
But I was curious because when I was talking about with power, I didn't know if do you handwrite at all, or is it all typing?
I only type. I used to handwrite more, but now like I found that my brain goes faster than my hand can physically write, and it frustrates me. And then I sort of lose where my brain was going because I'm still like backed up by the physical speed that I can go at. And also I'm so not used to it now that when I try to write longhand, my hand cramps up. I'm like, how do my muscles do this anymore? I'm like not as coordinated. So yeah, but I type really fast. And that's just sort of where my brain speed is calibrated to.
I gotcha. Yeah, I remember the last time like I actually had to write anything more than just my name one time. I mean, maybe signing for a house or something. You just have to write it multiple times. But yeah, I feel like the last time I actually wrote something out, I'm like, this is taking forever. I'm just going to type it out of my phone.
But I do appreciate like that it does engage your brain in a different way. So like writers will get something different out of writing longhand than you might just typing. Or even like a lot of authors will print out their draft when they're doing an editing pass, like to see it on a physical in like a very different form makes them read it differently and notice things that they might not if it's just the same digital document. So I
Yeah.
get why it's useful, but I get too
I
frustrated.
kind of feel like this is the same. I mean, it's not the same, but like I feel like it's a similar thing with like a reader. You know, you read something on a tablet versus reading a physical book. I feel like the read is different, like the way you process the words. I don't know if it's like the feel of the book or just the fact that that was how you read up until a couple years ago. I say a couple, several
Yeah,
years ago. But I feel like you take the information in a lot differently
you
depending on
do.
the medium you use.
And I'll even use small tricks like in between editing or revision passes, I might change the font completely on my manuscript. So like the brain is so used to seeing it one way that to suddenly see it in a different font, it's like you'll notice typos that you just skimmed right over before, or you'll read things differently or more carefully. So sometimes something even small like that works to trick your brain. You got to trick your brain to keep it fresh, especially when you're going over the same manuscript like 100 times.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And you're like,
You
gosh, I'm
start to
so
zone
tired of
out.
reading the same thing.
Yeah.
So how many fonts would you say you use in like a manuscript?
Oh, probably only a few passes. Well,
Oh,
honestly, most of
okay.
the time I forget to switch the font. I'm just like so focused, and I'm like, it's Times New Roman again. I should do it more, but yeah. So I'll do a few different passes and then switch it back.
That's interesting. Okay. All right. So before we get, I guess, more into your process, your writing process, I want to know a little bit about you. I mean, I know we've talked a little bit about your sound design work, but I want to know, who is Essa Hansen? How did she decide to become a writer, or why did she decide to become a writer? And kind of how we got to today, 20 days out from your debut.
I have a really boring author origin story, but also one I've heard from other authors, so maybe it's pretty common, where I've been writing as long as I can remember, like from when I was really, really little. Um, little notes at first, up to like full stories in fourth grade or so. But I was always surrounded by books and artists and musicians, and like I was always creative and using my imagination in all kinds of mediums. So I was like, I can't imagine when I wasn't encouraged to be creative and like telling stories and making things up and making up worlds in my head. Um, but what's probably more unusual is that I don't remember ever getting it in my head that I wanted to be a published author, or like the need to have a book, like a physical book, or to be published. I was always writing just for myself, and because I was passionate about it, it was like breathing, like I would do it just for myself. Didn't need to be paid or recognized or share it. It's just what I love doing. Um, so that carried on through my teen years, just creating worlds and like long series of books, and sort of like keep plotting on it and working on it and revising it and like spending time in different story worlds. But I was never thinking like, oh, I gotta finish this manuscript and like publish it. And I got really good, I think, at the world building aspect and like planning things out and creating characters, more so than like finishing a thing. And for a lot of people, finishing like one whole manuscript is a big deal, and it's like they don't ever get there. They just kind of churn at things. Um, but it wasn't until like 4 years ago or so that I thought like maybe I should try, creating and finishing a manuscript for an audience that's not me. And that seemed like such a challenge, right? Like that's a unique challenge. You're not just noodling in your own head. You actually got to make something that's like complete and well structured and coherent. So then I really dove into writing craft, like absorbing everything that I could about how to plot and structure and build character arcs and all of that. So that was really fun to like take all of my big imagination and start kind of shoving it into these more like external constrictions almost. Um, so wrote a manuscript, and then I went to the querying trenches trying to get a literary agent. And Nophek Gloss was kind of my second book. I was writing two at the same time, so it's sort of my second book, and went through the querying and on submission process along with this other epic fantasy I had written. So it's pretty fast from there, but it was like for a long time I was writing all the time, and that was my passion, but not thinking about publishing.
Mhm. When would you say that you started actually writing seriously? Like when did the change happen to where you go, you know what, I think I want to try publishing something instead of just jotting some stories down and just kind of, keeping them close to me. And
Well, like 2017, I think, was when I was like, all right, I'm going to write something for a market. But I actually had like coherent ideas before that, so like from my teen years. But what was interesting is all of my ideas seem to kind of all come back to one super, super long series on like the same timeline. So I'd be like, I'm going to write something new. And then I'll be like, shit, that's this character from this like book 3 is now in book 9. So like all my little ideas kind of like all ended up on this one big, which maybe one day I'll get back to this like 9-book epic, like that moves from fantasy to science fiction slowly over time. Like, and the ideas were too big. I think it's part of why I never like focused on finishing one or like was thinking of publication. And even around 2017, when I was like, I'm going to write something for market, the very first idea I started working on was like way too high level for me at the time for my craft. So I started into it, but I was like, I can't do this now. Like, I'm not getting my ideas across. Like, so that was the one I had to shelve. Like, I'll come back to it when I'm higher level or have like better gear,
Right.
So then I started working on something else that was sort of more exciting and more at my level at the time.
I gotcha. Yeah, that's a 9-book epic, huh?
Yeah. And like some of them were just little bits and pieces, but I was like, I realized at some point that I was writing one world, like one planet, but it was all in different time periods. So like, and I didn't realize because like maybe the later stuff is really like technological and they have like they're sort of parallel virtual realities all figured out. And then the earlier ones will be like the Silmarillion style of like how the world came into being, or like fantasy, standard epic fantasy stuff. And I didn't connect the two. And then as I like filled in these slots of it all being interconnected, I was like, wait a minute, this is one trajectory. But again, like as a teenager, I didn't have the craft or like even just the knowledge of narrative at the time to be able to tackle something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the ideas are still sitting around, but they'll be in the future. I'll get a couple series under my belt first before I go back to that.
I said we have some unfinished business first,
Yeah.
right? So tell me, who you said you read a lot. You had a lot of kind of artistic influences kind of surrounding, but who would you say are maybe some of your early influences into writing, and maybe even some that you have today, while you've got a series coming out?
Yeah. I'm always jealous when authors can answer this question really fast, like, oh, like this is my favorite author, or like this book series was pivotal in my journey. Because my brain starts going to like, I either forgotten a lot of the things that I read when I was really little, or there's like so many different things that I liked for different reasons that it's like I can't pick out the one, pivotal book or author.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I think what pushed me towards writing when I was in my young teen years was I lived very remotely. Like we didn't have a bookstore. We had a library, but I didn't also have peers that were like sending me recommendations or pushing books my way. So it was difficult to find the books that I think I would have really loved at that age. So now my to be read list is gigantic because all my new writer friends now, yeah, they're like, oh, have you read this like classic or this or this or this? And I was like, I wish I had. So I wasn't finding, like I read some of the, big series at the time, but I wasn't really finding what I would have loved. And I was reading a lot more fantasy than science fiction. Like I wasn't finding science fiction except in manga very much. But it pushed me towards writing because I was like getting frustrated with not finding to read what I wanted to read, or like the world. So I was like, I'll make it myself, which is a story I've heard from other authors. Who are like, I've decided to write what, or like I can do it better. You read something, you're like, I can write better than that. You're like 12-year-old self, like I can do better. But it got me writing, and I got really sort of moved away from reading for a long time into just like write a lot, and then finally found books again. And actually, Ian Banks' Fearsome Engine was one of those books where I read it, and it was so much different than anything else I had read, like multiple POVs, points of view, that are all very different, and some of the writing style really different, like one character who is written completely phonetically. And so like just how different it was like, oh, there's cool, like amazing books out there that I just have not been getting. So then that
Right.
sent me searching. And by then I think our internet was better. So we could like seek things out, like have resources again. But I was also, what I was finding for reading was a lot more like science, science books and philosophy and things like that, which I see the influence of now in my kind of esoteric style, and also where my scientific ideas are. Reading a lot about like consciousness and reality and quantum physics and cognitive science and stuff like that. Yeah. I was like, so where a lot of authors would answer like their favorite fantasy series or their favorite sci-fi author, I'm like,
Tolkien,
yeah.
Lewis, yeah.
obscure philosophy and esoteric sciences and quantum mechanics and stuff.
I gotcha. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat that you were. I didn't have a lot of people around me that were like gung ho about reading. I feel like a lot of the reading I did when I was younger was because of like the reading programs our school did, where it was you kind of had to read a lot to get kind of like your point system every week. And so it was, I'm not gonna say it was like forced, but it wasn't as enjoyable. And so I kind of, I mean, I really didn't read until junior, senior year in high school. And that was because my dad was like, hey, you need to read this. And he got me reading. I think the first thing I started reading was the Frankenstein series by Dean Koontz. He was like, all right. So I was like, okay, so I'm into kind of like thriller mystery. Cool. So I would just like read, Dean Koontz. And then I started reading some King, which is still so dumb. I was like, you didn't read Stephen King until you were 17, but it's just one of those things that nobody that I surrounded myself with, it was all video games. It wasn't books. So I got my stories in somewhere, but it wasn't through text. And then I went to college and didn't read, and then got out, and I was like, I just want to pick a book up. I need, I wanted something else to do than my general, and I read Wool by Hugh Howey, and I was just like, have books just gotten better? Exactly. What happened?
Yeah.
And and I've just been, voraciously reading since. Granted, it goes in lulls, ups and downs, but it's kind of crazy. But when you don't, I hate to say, when you don't surround yourself with those type of people, you probably won't get anything. But yeah, I wasn't getting any kind of recommendations.
Yeah, and like you don't know,
and now I give them out.
Yeah, and like you don't know what you don't know what you don't know. Like you don't know what you're missing. Someone isn't, if it's not entering your sphere. That's a good point. Like I was playing a lot of video games, so a lot of my like story was being absorbed by, role playing games and stuff like that, rather than books.
Yeah. I mean, I was, putting multiple hours into Halo and Call of Duty, and now all those games are just sitting there gathering dust while all my books are pristine, so it really is. I don't know if it's a different mindset or it's just that like, books are right now, they're an escape, just because of the lovely world we live in right now. But yeah, I mean, and now it's recommending things, but the tables turn on that too, because now I'm being recommended things from 10, 15, 20 years ago. They're like, you never read this? Or even from 5 years ago. Like I was being taunted and yelled at for not having read the first Law trilogy. And I did last year. I just binged it in a week. And I'm like, okay, now I kind of see why everybody, told me to.
Yeah, I get yelled at too. And I should get yelled at. Like I've missed a lot of classics and I've missed recent stuff, and but I'll get to it eventually, I hope.
Yeah, I said the same thing. People are like, so what do you do besides read? And I go, I don't know. I mean, I work. I play a little bit of video games. I would say I catch up on TV series, but I don't. There's just so much stuff out there, and it's so hard
There's so much
to keep
content.
up with all of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think even my reading style in video games too, like instead of picking at it little by little, I like to have the time to really dive in and like finish that book in 2 or 3 days, or like I'm gonna binge this video game over the weekend and like
Right.
I've played for 20 hours straight. Like I like to really dive into whatever world I'm gonna get into rather than putting it in between different interruptions.
Mhm.
So sometimes I'm kind of holding off on stuff because I know I really want the space to get into it.
Yeah. See, my wife is more likely to let me read a book for an hour or two than to let me play a game for 30 or 45 minutes. So the video game thing really, if I wanted to, would only be like kind of like the time that we have right now. It'd be right now. I'd be like, okay, so I'm caught up on work. I don't think I need to read anything right now. So here's 20 or 30 minutes. But yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot of the games that I enjoy are time consuming. I mean, it's your Fallouts or Zelda or something where I'm kind of one of those that has to explore the entire map and find everything before I actually get to the quest.
Yeah, me too. Like,
So I mean, I'll be wandering for 2 hours to find like one gun or one sword, and I'm like, time well spent.
got it. Good. Yeah, me too.
Oh, geez. All right. So kind of back to writing. You talked a little bit about how your process has been through the manuscript and so forth. But tell me a little bit about your writing process, maybe from the beginning of starting. Your first draft. How did you have like a set word count? Did you have a set like this is how my day is going to plan out? Did you have to have a cup of coffee with you the whole time? Did you go through 6 cups of tea? I've heard it all, but everyone's different. So I'm just curious.
Well, so process-wise, I plot now more than I used to, especially since like deadlines are really reality. Like I want to make sure that I'm have something solid before I start drafting. But before I was doing a lot more discovery writing and sort of let myself find the story as I'm going through it rather than sort of knowing every beat that I'm getting to. But it definitely did mean more revision later and more working on it to try and like figure out the story I wanted to tell. So now I plot a lot more. In terms of day-to-day process, I often have to fit writing around like 50-hour weeks of my day job. So it ends up being wherever I can fit it. So like in the morning, I maybe get an hour. My lunch break's an hour if I can fit something there. But the majority is probably in the evenings on a work day. But it's also when my brain's the most tired. So yeah. So I try and get, my heavy lifting done in the morning when my brain's fresh. I'm like, need coffee. I don't think the caffeine affects me. I have like the genes where it just does nothing. But I love the taste and it's like the ritual of it. Like writers are often ritualistic creatures. So like the ritual of it, like awake, coffee, manuscript, like get right into it.
Yeah.
But I also find it useful, like especially those long days where I can like get some writing done in the morning, and then if there's problems I need to solve or like a scene I don't quite have figured out, that'll be in my unconscious throughout the day, and I can be jotting little notes as like I solve problems. Be like, oh, this thing. I'll be like on the elevator or something. Oh yes, jot that down. So my brain is still be working on it in the background while I'm doing other stuff. And I'll often make a lot of progress that way because I'm not actively looking at the page, but I'm still doing the work. And then when I sit down in the evening, I'm like, okay, I've solved this and this is going to happen. And like I saw, had this vision of this thing in the scene that I want to put in. So then I'll sort of flesh that all out.
Gotcha. Okay. So have you found that you have writer's block at all? Like, have you ever just been stumped at a point, or is it something that you don't believe in? I know a lot of writers I've spoken to here recently say they just don't believe in it. That it's just maybe it's not the right time to write, or they need some more time to develop something before they start putting something to paper. I was just curious, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it usually means something's not either something's not working or you sort of haven't tripped into the next line of thinking, rather than like something is just completely shut down. Although, like, we can absolutely get burnt out or fatigued, and like the brain just doesn't want to keep working on this. And usually, it's like you need a break, or you need to brainstorm, or you need to like give it time, breathing room, and come back to it, or let it, like, again, subconscious sort of work on it until like, oh, like get the energy back, or like the idea springs up. So I've definitely, like with Nophek Gloss, I sort of wrote it in two parts, since I wasn't plotting. Like, I didn't know where the last third of the book was going, so I wrote up to that point, and then I was writing two manuscripts at the same time, so I could like, I was changing gears between like sci-fi and a fantasy. So when I would get stuck in one, I don't think I could do this now, but when I would get stuck in one, I would go to the other one, and it was different enough that I could like ping pong. I don't know how I did that, but I could. So I got like 2/3 of the way through and was like not sure where I was gonna end up. And that was partly because my pacing wasn't where it needed to be in the beginning, and I didn't have enough like plot that I preloaded later. But anyway, so I could set it aside and then came back to it later and tackled that last part of the plot, and then like cinched it all together at the end. But that definitely felt like I don't actually know. Like, I need to give this some space because I'm like, not sure yet where I wanted this plot to go. Nowadays, I think I'd turn to brainstorming more. Like, if I'm really stuck, then I'll just sit down and like, okay, what are all the things that could happen, or like, what am I excited about, or like, just try and get it flowing. Which is also what I do when I'm sound designing, especially if it's something like really surreal, like, all right, spaceship engine, like, this needs to sound cool, like nothing we've heard before, like, this is what it looks like. So like, okay, like, just need to start getting ideas. Or like, with magic sound design or something, like, I can't go out and record magic. That would be nice. That would be easy.
You mean you can't? Is that just the
thing? Go find a sorcerer. Like, can you do a fire spell? So since I can't do that, I got to start thinking of like, okay, what can I use? Like, what does this look like? What is the emotion I want to evoke? So like, brain starts thinking of materials and like other things that I can be using, like non-literal source. So I'm used to having to brainstorm and think out of the box a lot. So when I get stuck in writing, I know for me, it's usually, if it's not obviously fatigue, I know that I probably just need to work out the tangles of whatever the thing is. Or like, if I don't know where I'm going, then I need to brainstorm to like figure out where the excitement is going to lead me.
I gotcha. Yeah, I'm always curious because I've tried my hand at a few stories, and I find that the idea hits. I write, and then I'm like, okay, I feel good, and then I never come back to it. I've got 1,000 words of a story I started like 3 months ago because I woke up at like 2:30 in the morning and just was like, this is a great idea, right. And I don't know if it's just like I just don't have the time to do it, I don't have the interest to do it, or I just haven't figured out where do I go from there. And it's probably a combination of all the things. But
yeah, I do have a lot of those. Like, I have a big document where I just dump the story ideas, or sometimes it's not even an idea. It'll just be like a scene that pops into my head, and like, that's kind of cool. Or like something that's going on, I'm like, I don't know what's going on, and I'll write like a few paragraphs, or even just like some sentences of like, here's this, concept. Sometimes it'll be longer, like, a chapter's worth of stuff, but I don't know where it's going to go, or if it's part of a story or whatever, and just place to dump those bits. And I have come back to those before, or like cannibalize them for another story. Sometimes it just has to sit there until I come back to it later. I'm like, what is this weird thing? And then when I'm reading it like fresh, then it starts to expand into like a full story or something else, or like a short story. So I definitely do get those like bursts of energy that doesn't go anywhere.
Right. So I guess what I need to do is I just need to go read it again.
Yeah, read it after a while. Although some I come back to, and I was like, I was not good at jotting down what I was thinking at the time. I don't know. Assuming that I would understand later. It's like when you're writing down dreams or something, like kind of vague. I'll come back to it and be like, this doesn't make any sense.
It was great while I was in it, but now that I write it down, it sounds stupid.
Yeah, I don't know. Or like my the epic fantasy manuscript I was working on, like, so in my document of like just dumping stuff, I had one line that just popped in my head and I put it there and then came back to it like months later and I'm like, this is like, what's going on? And just started to imagine a scene around it. And then that ended up being an entire novel from like this one intriguing little line. So that happens too. It's like something that pops in just ends up being a lot bigger. But a lot of my
Right.
ideas come from like some seedling of like an image or a line or like an idea that at some point gets watered and becomes a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, and you're like, you remember that thing?
Yeah,
Here's
totally.
100,000 words.
Uh-huh. Well, and again, maybe it comes back to like not being a high enough level for the thing or like not, being geared enough to take it on. So some ideas, I think, just sit around until I come back with like a different craft or a different mindset or like just more experience developing ideas, and then it grows into something good. But
Yeah, I think some of mine is just like not really diving into the craft of it. I feel like I'm like, I've read enough that I could write something, and then I'll read something and go, "There's no way. I'm not even close to that." Like I think my main thing is, I guess it's not really just word count, but trying to get a scene of people just talking and trying to get the descriptions just right, and the emotion behind the words and stuff. And I would just be like, he said something, 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 and then she responded by da 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 da. And I'm like, how does somebody come up with this whole thing of that's like 2 pages long and it's just a conversation? I'm like, that baffles me.
well, there's different approaches, right? Like one author might put like just the skeleton down, like it's not pretty, but these are the bones of everything that's going on, like get all the scenes out. And another writer might, need every line to be perfect and every paragraph to like be firing on all cylinders before they keep going on. So it's like slower, right? Because you're analyzing it as you go and like editing.
Yeah.
You can't quite move on until I'm somewhere in between, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the editor brain going on, because when I first started doing book reviews, I also did a lot of like alpha, beta, and gamma reading, and so I did some like proof passes and edits and so forth. And even when I read, I mean, I sit there and find typos in finished copies. I know there's supposed to be typos in ARCs, but and I think that's what it is, because I've read that 1,000 words that I've written, a couple of times, and I keep just like tweaking it just a little bit, and I go, can I just leave it alone and just like write another scene? Why can't I do that? But no, I'm just like, this has to be perfect before I can move on. And that's probably why I'm sitting here, with not 1,001 words, just 1,000 words.
Yeah. And they often say like you need to learn how to turn your editor brain off when you're drafting, which I kind of agree with if it's like so active that it's stopping you from continuing. But I also I edit as I'm going a lot, and like I'll read over and kind of like somewhere in between, and I can't just spill words onto the page and come back later. Like I need to make sure and I write really linearly too, so I need to make sure that like I am in the flow of the scene and the emotions and like craft it as I go, and I end up with really clean drafts even though it's much slower, because it's like the editor and the writer are like swapping the baton all the time, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm in a good place, it's not enough that it like literally stops me from carrying through the scene. Just
But I
makes
said,
it
it
more
almost sounds like you're just trying to make it easier for yourself down the road.
I
Like,
hope
I'm just going to go ahead and do this now so I don't have to worry about it, right after the deadline. And they're like, okay, we need edits back. And I'm like, you know what? I'm good. Just going to relax.
Yep. Yeah, do as much as I can in each pass.
I gotcha. All right, so let's talk about your debut that's coming out, and like I said, in 20 days. I got my coming too.
Yes.
So Nophek Gloss, book 1 in the Graven trilogy.
Yes.
So comes out on November 17th. I know we've been hearing a lot about it for several months. mostly because us book bloggers can't get enough of Twitter and book community stuff. But tell us a little bit about Nophek Gloss and kind of what we can expect going into the novel.
Yeah, so it's set in a bubble multiverse, which is maybe not like some of the multiverses you've seen before. It's all on one timeline, a bunch of spherical individual universes stuck together in like a vast foam. And they can be all sizes, from like little tiny ones to galactic scale. And there's different physics in each one. So technology and biology passing through transforms in various ways to match the new physics on the other side. So that was sort of my seed idea for the story, and what sort of economy would emerge and what sort of like explorer culture would emerge. But the story starts really small with a mechanic boy on an isolated world. He's ignorant of this gigantic multiverse that he lives in, and he's been raised to have just one function. I can spoil the first couple chapters. So bad things happen. Bad things happen, and he's thrust into this gigantic world, and falls in with a family of misfit aliens and galactic explorers with a very special starship. And he has to come to terms with his origins, his ignorance, and his trauma from this event, while he seeks out justice for his people who were slaughtered. So it's sort of him growing up too fast, physically, emotionally, and morally, as he comes to grasp this gigantic world and what his moral responsibility is in it. So he tries to figure out his place.
I gotcha. So I guess what influenced not only the story but your main character?
Influence, again, I can't point to like
You don't have to say authors' names or books.
yeah, well, I think personally, since I work so abstractly, like I'm absorbing inspiration from all kind of like video games and movies and books and author styles, and even like science that I read and out in nature, like, and then those little bits percolate up in various spots in my manuscript, and or I'll start with a little seed idea from something like a bit of science and then try and take it in a new direction. So my inspiration, I think, comes from all over. But also, as I get this question a lot, everyone wants to know what's your influences. I always wonder about like the subconscious influences that we don't think about or that we absorb when we were really young. So like the idea started with this big multiverse, and what a world where diversity is the norm and transformation is the norm would be like. And also sort of explore culture and economy based on maps and like exploration. But when I was little, like I watched Star Trek and Stargate and shows that are very much like a team exploring alien worlds, and like sort of like the culture clash and what sort of threats could threaten like all worlds that they're going to. So I'm sure there are lots of like sort of unconscious influences that I absorbed when I was little that's like are where my interests bring into creating this world. But I can't. Yeah.
I was just curious, why decide to do, multiverse rather than something, I would say something a little easier, just one world.
Right. Well, it's like a really complex world, but it's manageable because like some elements, the revenge plot is pretty simple, and the character is pretty straightforward, and the story starts like really, really small. It takes like 6 chapters before we really start to see different alien species and weird technology and like what the multiverse really is. So I try to make it manageable for the reader, and I think part of my process writing the book was probably making it easier for myself. So I got like a twofer there, like easing my own author brain into the scope of the world by doing it literally in the plot and with the character. And it's helpful to have an ignorant character who like can have things explained to him. I totally cheated.
You did. You found a plot, a plot hole where you could just be like, well, maybe I need to learn some more about this. Let's let the main character learn some
Yeah.
more.
So it's helpful to have like a some familiar framework for the reader if you're gonna add in all these weird ideas. And like the early reviews and stuff, people are like really love my imagination and like the weird technology and weird aliens and stuff. But I think that works because there's enough familiarity and like sci-fi tropes and stuff that to hang the weird stuff on so it feels grounded and it's not just like a complete overwhelm of like unusual prose and bizarre species and environments and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, I feel, kind of like we were saying, I feel like, if you dump somebody into something that everything is completely unfamiliar, they're going to be into their head and it may be something that it's just too overwhelming. But, if you add enough stuff in, or like you said, have your main character get explained it to, I think it helps kind of bring a reader into your world, rather than kind of keeping them on the outskirts, and we know all the insider information, but you're just gonna have to figure it out.
Yeah, sure. And like my idea definitely started with the world, and then of course I needed a character to focus on to have an actual plot. But my original idea was when the protagonist Caden was a lot older. So we got okay, got a hero, give him a cool starship. He can like explore this multiverse. And I was originally thinking kind of more like a serial style, like going to different worlds and like explore like zoomed in bits of this multiverse. But then I started developing his backstory, which started in a like isolated world. And that took off into I have a habit of like little things like exploding into a full novel, or like this is why I'm not good at writing short stories. Like it suddenly ended up something gigantic. So anyway, his backstory, like prologue, ended up this whole novel. But I think it was for the best that like instead of trying to start by dumping the reader or my own brain into like this gigantic world and explain everything all at once, I could start really isolated and ease the reader in. And hopefully by book 2, they're like into the, they're in the world, and I can just throw everything in.
I gotcha.
And more dimensions and.
Hey, nothing wrong with
Yeah.
let's start it off. Let us in easy, and then then start the Michael Bay explosions in book 2.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I did this consciously or like so as a debut you kind of want to convince readers that like come along with me. This is something new, so maybe like having a lot of familiar stuff in the beginning of the book is like come along. You don't know you're going somewhere weird. Like this is like other stuff you read, I promise. Yeah.
So I guess how did you? Not really. How did you yet? Because we still got some days for the debut hits. But what makes Nophek Gloss, I guess, stand out from the crowd of other space opera or science fiction novels? What is it about Caden that you believe makes Nophek Gloss a worthy read, or is it just Caden and everything else? Is it really just character driven, or do you need to experience everything in the novel for yourself? To get the whole experience.
Well, I can kind of, since there's some early reviews and blurbs now, I can go from what everybody's noticing, which often I think isn't what the author thinks of their own work as, because we see it so many times. So like the scope of my imagination and like the weird aliens and environments and technologies like seems normal to me. Like I might not say like you're in for a bizarre experience, but all the readers are like that's unusual to them. So it's like not what's in the market right now. And I think my prose as well, like the way that I describe things, the sort of unusual word choice is also part of that sort of odd experience that's not quite like the style of other books right now, other sci-fi. So there's that angle, but also, so like Cadence, I think how I deal with morality and like the heroism. So he's very singular minded on revenge, and part of that is he's trying to outrun all the grief, like this big big traumatic event that was too much for a kid to handle. So he's sort of trying to run away from that, nipping at his heels by throwing himself at, you know, something much bigger than himself, thinking that he's getting justice, and he survived for a reason that he thinks is toppling this big organization and make sure no one goes through what he went through. And he does a lot of like valiant and heroic deeds, but they're not always rewarded like they would often be. Like he doesn't get the fanfare or medal around his neck, but he keeps throwing himself at what he thinks is doing the right thing, in a sort of self-sacrificing way. But the complicated morality and the gray morality, I think, is really fun, especially in such a big, diverse world where there's many angles to come at it with. And I really enjoyed exploring like a character was isolated and is pretty ignorant of the world, but because he has such an outside perspective on this culture that everybody's been in, and like he sees the things that are normalized that they don't, the adult crew that he's with, like, yeah, that's how it's always been, or that's normal. He's like, no, this oppression is bad. Like that's exploitation. Like, is that? So he's sort of seeing the world in a different way, and maybe makes bad choices. Heroic, but bad choices based on that.
I gotcha. Yeah, I'm interested because you talk about your prose and how early reviewers talked about prose. I feel like I read a lot of my reads are based. I wouldn't say based on prose. I mean, a lot of it's very character driven, which it sounds like Nophek Gloss is. But I'm always interested in new prose. Like I read Anna Smith Sparks' Empires of Dust trilogy a couple years ago, and it's one of my favorite trilogies ever. But the prose in it, I feel like, turns a lot of people off. It's very poetic, and words are repeated, but they're repeated for a reason. It's very emphasized or emphatic, whatever you want to call it. But like hers, Ed McDonald's, which I'm just going to keep naming off grimdark authors apparently. Mark Lawrence. I feel like it's not even about the story sometimes. It's really just about the words. I can just read it and the words are just dripping off the page, and I just go, I just need more, and sometimes the story gets lost to me. But what is it about your prose maybe that is different than other things that we've read? I know you said the way you describe certain things, like, what are some words that you use that maybe are or maybe kind of like, wait, what I need to go find a definition for that.
Yeah, I think like I've heard some friends of mine who are fast readers. They're like, oh, they've all said separately, like, this slowed me down. It's like dense, but in a good way. Like I can't speed read through this. Like I gotta kind of chew on it. And my prose has also been called immersive. So like I use all five senses and I pay attention to rhythm and cadence. And so I think the writing is really sort of lush and immersive and sensory, which slows people down because they're sort of like asked to be drawn into it. And I use, which partly this comes from working in sound, but I'll use like odd word choices that people wouldn't think of. Because in sound, I'm like thinking out of the box. I'm like, I'm going to use this ice sound for this fire magic, or like, kind of cross. And I also have some synesthesia with sound. So like my senses are often cross-wired. So I may think of sound in terms of like a texture that I feel or like a shape, that sort of thing. So when I'm looking for word choices, I'll be describing the event in like another sensory mode than what you would think, or like in terms of emotion or something. Which it feels normal to me because it's sort of how my everyday world is like and how I make sense of it. But to a reader, that's like not where their brain would go. So that's sort of like interesting for them, just in terms of the prose and like how I describe things and paint the world.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, and it's always nice to, because I feel like I'm a speed reader as well. So I'm interested to see how much it slows me down. So I know you talked about just turning in, I guess, the draft for book 2. So are you currently working on book 3? Is there anything else that you're working on currently that you can even potentially talk about?
I'm focused on book 3 now until I get my book 2 edits back. Sort of leapfrogging, which is kind of it's a weird sensation to be leapfrogging yourself on deadlines, like moving from one book to the next. So I need to figure out where I'm going with book 3 and try and plot it as much as I can before I get my book 2 edits back, and then be revising that. But like before you have a book deal, you can spend as much time as you want, noodling on the manuscript, or you aren't always thinking in series because it may not be picked up as a series. So now it's been a different experience this year, especially during COVID and fires and all that. But a different experience, like have deadlines and try and like keep keep bouncing between different books in the series and make sure I'm on track.
Yeah, I'm sure that, and on top of having a day job, and
All those things, yeah.
because all authors they just write all day. That's all they do.
Well, that's part of why I'm so behind on reading and like video games I've missed and like other stuff like that because there's no time in the day.
Right. I mean, you can't just automatically extend the hours of the day to enjoy the things you want
No,
to enjoy.
I can sleep less, but that's not good either.
It's true. No, it's not. I mean, especially if coffee doesn't help. So,
No.
last question I got for you: are there any books you've read recently, that you've actually had the opportunity to read, or even anything that, say, the past few years, that maybe needs some more love that you'd recommend to the audience?
Yeah, and let me look up the release date. One of my critique partners' books is coming out on November 7th. It's epic fantasy, grimdark fantasy called Under the Lesser Moon by Shelley Campbell, coming out from Mythos and Ink. And it is amazing. Like Shelley's writing always inspires me. Like the 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 lush emotional prose and like very character driven, and the world comes alive and there's dragons. So if you like rage of dragons and like lush epic fantasy, check out Under the Lesser Moon.
Okay.
Coming out next
Yeah.
week.
Go ahead.
Coming out next week.
Yeah.
I'll be
Yeah.
spamming on Twitter and everywhere because I love this book.
Yeah, I think Shelly follows me on Twitter, and I think I just added it to my Goodreads page and read the synopsis. It sounds fantastic.
Yeah,
So
I want to
I'll definitely
reread
check it out.
when I have time.
When you have time, yeah.
I know, but I would because I'm gonna steal all her beautiful verbs and like. Yeah.
We'll make sure we edit that out. So she didn't hear that. We don't want
She knows.
her stealing the birds.
She knows. She can steal some of my verbs.
There you go. There you go.
But we'll trade verbs.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong at all. Well, Essa, I really appreciate you coming on today and chatting with me. Everybody, again, Nophek Gloss comes out in 20 days on November 17th. So make sure you pick up a copy. I am very much looking forward to reading it. Hopefully I can get you a review here soon and tell everybody else how much I love it. But Essa, just again, it's been a wonderful time chatting with you. It's been great getting to know you on social media, and definitely looking forward to the next books in the series. And then whenever you get that 9-book epic fantasy out, we'll definitely be looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on to chat.
Absolutely, and we'll do this again. Maybe we can do it around book 2, or maybe a little later, or maybe next time I'll give you a little more heads up and we can do a little bit of a reading or something.
Yeah, that's great.
Fantastic. Well, you have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to Pub Day.
Thank you, and thanks everyone.